Is gambling ruining sports? Oh, Sports Spectrum just came out with quite a survey here that touches on that and much more, including faith in sports and a whole bunch of other topics. And joining me to talk about it is CBN Sports Will Dawson. Will, how's it going?
It's going well. This whole thing is fascinating, Dan, and it happened during a week that, there's a lot of other things. There are a lot of other things going on, including the Super Bowl and the Kansas City Chiefs trying to make history here. So we have a lot to talk about.
Yeah, and we did just, if you missed our segment, we'll put it in the description. Will and I talked about, he got to interact with some of the players there in New Orleans that are participating in the Super Bowl, their faith and their, testimonies and things of that nature. He got to talk to several players on that front. You don't want to miss that. Check that out. But this is interesting, this survey, Will, because, we can start with the gambling aspect of it because it's a relatively new phenomenon here that the sporting world sort of accepted. The gambling outfits like DraftKings and FanDuel and all of this, they sort of, for a long time, they had existed for a while. And then they just made the decision, okay, I guess everyone's doing this now, and there can be money to be made from this. If you watch any sports programming, you're almost 99% sure to see an ad for one of these gambling sites. And a lot of it can be, harmless, right? If you're just doing it in extreme moderation or whatever, but there's obvious dangers there. And including with the players themselves that are involved. And that could be, do we have a big problem brewing here?
I don't think there's any question we have a big problem brewing. This has been going on. It's nothing new. Gambling and sports has been going on since gambling and sports have been around. And you think back to boxers taking falls, and you think back to the point shaving scandal in the 70s and 80s. And now with all of the states that have legalized sports gambling, 38 of the 50 states plus Washington, D.C. have laws that allow sports gambling. And so I think this is something that we personally, I can speak for myself. I thought that probably fans had a more negative view of sports gambling than they actually do. And now the question is that because it's legal now? Or is it just something that as fans of the sport that you're just okay with? And the downfall is that you run into problems with legalized gambling, that you have athletes that are now at least, they've always been involved, but now we're seeing it come out more and more, and maybe even part of larger gambling rings.
And before we get to some of those examples, what does this survey show as far as fan perception? What are the numbers on this? What are we seeing?
Yeah, you see a positive view of what's going on in sports gambling. So 17% very positive view, 25% somewhat positive. That's 42% of the population that at least has a positive view, and then 35%, they could care one way or the other. So
yeah, only 22% negative. Yeah, only 22% negative or somewhat negative, and that's really kind of shocking, Will, because you're right. Maybe it's because so many of them are participating in it. If you look deeper down in those numbers, though, like still, even though there is a significant number of people who do use these apps. Still, like, I think it was 44% have never engaged in it at all. So, it's like 50-50 almost. You're kind of in that range where half the people are doing it, half the people aren't. But you look at some even recent examples. We talked about Terry Rozier last time. He's a Miami Heat guard who's under federal investigation now for possibly altering his performance on the court. We'll see how that one turns out. He's not been formally charged yet. Just want to say that's just an investigation that's happening right now. Jonte Porter was a former Toronto Raptors player, permanently banned from the NBA after admitting to manipulating his performance for gambling purposes. We've had MLB umpires, Pat Hoberg, and then remember we had the interpreter for Shohei Ohtani, who got caught up in this. And according to Ohtani, he had no idea this guy was gambling millions of dollars of Ohtani's money, and so that's theft too and fraud, but nevertheless, still related to gambling, the greed that comes involved in it. But you can imagine the temptation for these players. You'd think like, oh, it'd just be so easy for me to just not make this line, or just maybe I'll, get an extra rebound or whatever the case might be. They figure they can, especially going on the under, like you can easily not do something, right? That you're the line shows that you might do. So we're seeing it already, and these are just the ones we know about. Will, I'm just wondering if the fans of these sports, if more and more things like this come out, no one's going to trust what they're seeing on the field or the court.
You already have a wide span of the audience, maybe not a wide span, but some of the audience who thinks it's all fixed anyway, right? We've heard the conspiracy theories about the NFL recently, and think that that's kind of on the fix. You do see something that happens with a guy like Terry Rozier and him going out of the game with an ankle injury and the red flags coming up. The fact that the FBI is involved, the NBA didn't really want to touch it. They did their own investigation. Nothing really there from what they found, but now the FBI is involved. It gives me as a sports fan, it makes me kind of feel a little yucky, right? Gives you the icky feeling about, man, I really just want to know that these guys are going out and competing the best that they can to the best of their God-given abilities. And I don't want to think that somebody on my team is shaving points, whether or not it affects the outcome of the game. I don't know. But, gambling is one of those things where it's not strictly prohibited in the Bible, but we do need to use godly wisdom and discernment when it comes to things like this. It can be fun. I mean, they're betting on what color the Kool-Aid, no, the Gatorade's going to be in the Super Bowl. Is it going to be red? Is it going to be purple? Is it going to be blue? And those kinds of things can be a fun, entertaining distraction. But when you talk about the love of money or greed or that sort of thing, the thing that blows my mind is a guy like Terry Rozier. His contract's like $100 million. What is the draw? What's the reason that we're doing this? And is it to make an extra 20,000? There's certainly a problem with that.
Yeah, I mean, you look at, and this is like the gambling problem. You look at Charles Barkley, and I think even Michael Jordan at one point, like they were, they're going into casinos and like just dropping hundreds of thousands of dollars on roulette tables and stuff. And it's just like, why? You're already beyond rich. It just doesn't make a lot of sense.
Yeah.
And so you do have to think about the spiritual implications there. Like, what is going on inside our hearts? Even when we get the things that we were desiring, and obviously most of us are going to be on a much smaller scale than hundreds of millions of dollars like Charles Barkley or whoever else has been in these massive gambling things. But we all do it in our own lives to some extent. We want and we aim for something in our life, and that, materially. And then once you get that, you think, I just want the next thing. And it's like, you rewind your life like 20 years and you can think of all the things you were hoping for at that point, right? Maybe when you were a newly, married couple and you were hoping for a house someday. And, you'd look at these houses while you're in an apartment and you'd think, man, that house is amazing. I'd love that. Then you get in a house like that and then you're like, you know what? That bigger house down there looks a lot nicer. I mean, we'd have so much more room if we had that. Our hearts are just naturally drawn to be discontented with what we have. And maybe that's the same thing we're seeing here with some of these players.
I think that's good. I think that's wise and something that we should always be keeping in our mind. And that's what the Bible instructs us to do, is to be constantly aware of the sin that resides in each one of us. And also the other thing too, is there's a chemical dependence. There's a dopamine rush that comes with gambling and winning. And we can't discount that. It's not to excuse the behavior, but those gambling websites, anytime you hear an advertisement at the very end, they'll say, do you have a gambling problem? And then in really quick, kind of like the small words at the bottom of the screen, you're hearing the issues that you could potentially run into with gambling. So it's like a Surgeon General's warning with somebody smoking cigarettes. Look, these things, one or two of these things may not kill you. It's probably not wise to be smoking a cigarette or gambling, but you need to be aware of the long-term damage that it can potentially do to you as a person. And then as a sports fan, watching the games and knowing that it's going on somewhere. And these, I think probably it is a lot more widespread than we could ever imagine.
Yeah. I mean, I think actually, did you see a few weeks ago, maybe a month or two ago now, LeBron James was in the middle of a game, and some guy like in the one of the front rows, yelled out like, "Hey, like, basically get another rebound. I've got such and such money on this thing." And LeBron like heard him and nodded and like went flying in and got a rebound and pointed at the guy and stuff, and
it's very generous of LeBron, by the way.
Yeah, very generous of LeBron. Like, he wasn't going to try for the rebound otherwise. But but no, I mean, but it's a different time right now. And you look back at Pete Rose and what he did and what that was wrong as well. But like, they've just like shunned that guy from life, and not
went
for
to
being
his
in the Hall
grave,
of
not
Fame.
experiencing the Hall of Fame. Yeah.
Yeah. And, at least according to him, he didn't bet on like any of his games, but still it was, he bet on baseball. It was a terrible decision. Like, what's the point? Like you said, but yeah, so what, let's talk about other things that were in this survey. Will, there were some, I mean, Sports Spectrum, we know they focus a lot on faith. What were they looking at from the faith angle here?
Yeah, Jason Romano over at Sports Spectrum does an amazing job. We got to talk with him down in New Orleans and some of the interviews that they were doing. But we're kind of on the same track here, just trying to give the athletes a platform, which they have. They have a huge platform, but give them a microphone to speak truth about their faith in Christ. And what you're seeing here is that fans approve of that overwhelmingly. They either approve or they're like, whatever. To 90-something%, and only 11% oppose athletes sharing their faith, which I think is very positive.
Yeah, no, that's phenomenal. And, you think it's interesting to me because I would think the opposition would be high. I would expect the approval to be fairly high. Just because there's a lot of Christians in the country, a lot of people of faith in the country. I would think I would have thought the opposition would have been a little higher, just given the pushback we often see from the rest of those who are not members of the faith community. They tend to get frustrated with that, but we're seeing it more and more, as you've been chronicling on CBN Sports YouTube page and the Instagram page over there. And people are becoming more bold, and even in like college, like you see it coming up the ranks, like Ohio State, having that big revival there. And so we're definitely seeing something happening, God moving in the sports world. And it's been cool to see.
It's been very cool to see. And the fact that we're able to go out and talk to these guys, and it's been really cool to witness. And it also is, like we've talked about, it's not just a generic, I want to give thanks to God. These guys are breaking down Bible verses and talking about how they're discipling their own kids. And it's amazing. And you're right. When we talk about the opposition, that 11% opposition, though, they are the noisy minority, aren't they? When you think about the Freedom from Religion Foundation that goes after a guy like Deion Sanders for praying with this team, and saying that the players' constitutional rights, their First Amendment rights, have been violated, when to not allow Deion Sanders to do that in the locker room violates his First Amendment rights. So, I'm always impressed and amazed with guys who are willing to share their faith. A guy like Patrick Mahomes, who's got everything, and he gives glory quickly to God. And so it's cool. And you see guys on different levels in their faith walk. You look at a guy like Brandon Graham, who has been in the league for 15 years, and he really is convicted about discipling his children, which we all should be. So it's just cool, because you get a broad spectrum of people and answers, and we know that we're all different, and God uses us in different ways, and we're all members of the body, and a toe is not the same as a nose, and an ear is not the same as a shoulder. Right. And when it comes to these guys in New Orleans, and these guys are going to be strapping their helmets on and playing against each other, we know that there are a lot of believers on both the Eagles and the Chiefs.
Amen to that. All right, Will, before we go here, final chance, final prediction. Last time we talked, I was firmly of the belief that the Eagles are going to win this game due to their better roster construction and Saquon Barkley. What's your final pick here?
You're giving me an opportunity to change my pick.
I'm giving you one last chance.
I can't do it, though. You know, I do believe that the Eagles are a better team. I think if they played this game on a neutral site they're at a neutral site now, but if they played this game in September or October, that this Eagles team would beat the Chiefs. But man, this is the Super Bowl. Anytime the playoffs happen, you look at the record with Andy Reid and Patrick Mahomes, and
yes.
How do you believe that they're not going to make history here and win 3 consecutive Super Bowls? So that's where I'm headed right now.
It's a fair position, Will. I mean, to basically be all right until Mahomes shows me otherwise that he's going to lose. You just keep going with Mahomes, right? Like it's just
right.
It seems to be the way it's going. But Will Dawson, appreciate you being here, and everyone, make sure you check out his work over at CBN Sports YouTube channel and Instagram channel as well. Will, thanks so much.
Thanks, Dan.